The answer to this question should be fairly obvious. It comes down to personal preference. But I find this question so fun. But for me personally, if you were going to talk about new anime versus old anime, I think it's fair to say that both have their strengths and their weaknesses. For starters, new anime has higher technology than it's ever been. The quality of animation has gone up, and also it's easier to access. However, with old anime, I feel like there was a lot more detail put into the backgrounds and into some of the character designs. Not saying that new anime has no detail into their art styles, but when I look at the older anime, I just see so much more detail put into stuff like the backgrounds. Vampire Hunter D is one of my favorite looking movies of all time, and I haven't seen a modern anime equivalent to that. One of my biggest problems with modern anime is just how much we get. I'm going to use a phrase used from Gaming Off the Grid, and I just feel scatterbrained with just how much anime we get in a single season. It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, there's no way anybody is actually going to get through all of them, and if you do, the new season has probably already started, so I don't think variety is a bad thing, but I just think that there's too much coming out within a single season for things to really grow on their own. Another huge negative for me personally is that the whole locking up anime is bullshit. Interspecies reviewers, I know, is not going to be for everybody, but the fact is people wanted to watch that, and since the companies locked that anime up, they can't find it legally, so it's just bullshit. You know, let people what they want to watch, and if you don't want it, sell it out to a different company. It's not rocket science. Get some money out of it. But I think if you were to ask me which is better in terms of writing, I'm not going to answer that, because both have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to the writing. And no matter what decade, you're always going to have good stories, and no matter what decade, you're always going to have some bad stories. I think that storytelling is universal across all generations. Now, I did ask some of my friends if they wanted to chime in on this topic because it was a fun topic. So let's hear what they have to say.
Hey, what's going on, J Chip? This is your boy Ashton Man, and thank you so much for having me in the video. So, old anime versus new anime. Man, you know I'm about to dive into this. So, old anime and new anime, there's two things that stand out to me the most that really does make this a very interesting topic. One of the things is genres. I think the genre has definitely got more creative for the new anime versus old anime. Old anime really focused on the action adventure being its cornerstone for most of our great anime that we cherish and love to rewatch over the years. But I think with the new anime, they are able to really exploit more genres, being that we get more comedy, slice of life, and horror. Now, I'm not saying that we haven't got them previously, but they wasn't as big as action adventure. Now, the second thing that I really did focus on is the way we receive anime. And the way that we receive anime now versus back then is that anime back then was more long and running anime, which we would get like 124 episodes that didn't have any breaks in between, as far as like breaking it up into seasons like we are more familiar with now. Because now we get like 12 or 24 episodes in a season, and we can kind of like juggle more anime at a time that way. And actually, that's more of a proficient way to doing it. But not saying that we can't really enjoy how they did it previously, because we get something like Yu Yu Hakusho that ran for over 100 episodes, and watching that all the way through was definitely crazy. But it left us less room to really watch more anime at a time. So if you really had to ask me, I'm gonna go with the new anime, man, because to me, I think like it really did like exploited more genres to where we can like more than what we normally used to, and the way that the seasonal anime is set up. So J Chip, I hope this really does help. And again, thank you so much for having me in the video, and you have a nice one, my friend. Bye.
In considering which is better, old anime or new anime, there are a few things we can consider from a theoretical perspective. Now, intuitively, a lot of people may be inclined to argue that newer anime are inherently better simply because as time goes by, we develop better technology to produce higher quality animation, we can put more into the soundtrack, things that would have taken us a lot more effort can now be done effortlessly and with better quality, and therefore there does seem to be this trend upwards towards a higher quality production behind the anime. But does that check out in theory? I think a great genre that demonstrates the theoretical development of anime is action. If we consider action anime before Dragon Ball, they look a lot different than what they did after Dragon Ball, and there's a few reasons for this. Now, while Dragon Ball didn't necessarily do anything new, it did offer a formula that would be used for decades afterwards. Essentially, everything before Dragon Ball was working these different tropes, these different cliches, these different character archetypes in different ways, and those that stuck continued to develop through time, and ultimately Dragon Ball was able to take all of those in a certain way and put them together in a way that was most pleasurable to people. This became the basis of the Battle Shonen formula. Everything after Dragon Ball then is either responding to or building upon. I think a clear trajectory we can see then is between, say, Dragon Ball and Hunter x Hunter. Again, what we see here is that now that the formula has been established through Dragon Ball, we have a complexification of that formula through Hunter x Hunter. And some may argue that that complexification carries onward into the 20th and 21st century. There is a stability developing with time, but does that necessarily translate to quality of anime? Well, not necessarily, because this is the trade-off. Although Dragon Ball set a kind of formula that we can use and complexify thereafter, everything afterwards is still kind of either fitting into that template or slightly going outside of it, responding to it in some way. Whereas before Dragon Ball, for instance, what we're doing is we have a lot more experiments. We don't know what's going to work. There hasn't been a large-scale success of any anime at that time, and so things were a little more experimental. And I think that condition laid the landscape for a lot of really interesting anime. But fuck all that theoretical stuff. What's my favorite era? Well, first of all, what do we consider new anime? There's a certain extent to which we consider anime from the past 5 years new, but we can also equally say that anything from the past 10 years is new relative to anime produced in the 90s. Well, for me, I find that there's a significant shift in anime, both in terms of production and kind of typical themes we see every 10 years. So I reckon that new anime is typically thought of anything from 2010 onwards. We kind of have like that middle era of anime, 2000 to 2009, and then we have old anime, which is everything before that, which is significantly less than what we find in the previous 2 decades. Personally, my favorite, of course, is going to be that middle era. I really enjoy a lot of late 2000s anime. Most of my favorites come from the period between 2007 and 2009 alone. We have, for instance, in 2007, Darker Than Black, Gurren Lagann, and Naruto Shippuden, 3 which are in my top 10, if not top 5. 2008 brought us Toradora, which is another absolute classic. And in 2009, we have Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Eden of the East. Again, this was a great 3 years for anime. I will say, of course, that most of the anime I've consumed was probably from the early 2010s. A lot of really good anime come from that era, but the ones that have the tightest grip on my heart come from the late 2000s. That's the kind of ideal aesthetic for me. That's really the peak of a lot of storytelling for me. But of course, a great story can be written in any era. I think that about does it for me.
All right, so first of all, quick thank you to Chip. Thank you for having me on, and let's get on to the topic at hand. Old versus new anime. All right, so there's a lot of different directions we can take this conversation to. Old versus new anime, you can talk about how the animation's changed, how the art's changed, how, the stories and how the trends have changed. Right now, in the current era, we have a lot of isekai fantasy shows, and we're getting less and less original content. And with older shows, you had very selective, select market. You didn't really have much. A lot of the time, it was just shonens until you had Eva, where, obviously you had mechas before, but after Eva, you saw a lot more original content, a lot more experimental adaptations being released. And after the originals, you had the moe boom and you had the idol boom and all of that stuff. And eventually to where we are now with the whole isekai fantasy, as I've said before. And personally, it's hard to say if you like old or new or more. It's a preference of eras and stuff like that, but I would like to look at this from the perspective of the directors. So what I mean by that is, if we look at, for example, Watanabe, who's definitely part of the old guard, and Ono and Ikuhara is part of the old guard who's still making anime even today, you get to see a lot of the evolution of their thought process and how they've changed themselves. You saw like Bebop, Eva, Utena. With Ikuhara, you see you see him being even more wild than he was in his 90s with Sarazanmai and all of that craziness that went on there. You see, you know, Watanabe having a more music focused anime with Carol and Tuesday. You see Ono finally finishing up the rebuilds. You see all of these guys that are, you know, part of the old guard definitely, and still releasing stuff that's, you know, very personal to them still, and, you know, still as wacky and fun as they weren't back then. And you get to see a lot of that with old and new anime in general. For example, if you look at Ghost in the Shell from the 90s and you look at Standalone Complex, you see a lot of the overlay. It's still the same story in a lot of ways. It's just the focus was a little different. And if you look at other the sci-fi shows after that, you have like Steins Gate, Psycho-Pass, all of that stuff, and there's still, you know, callbacks to the older sci-fi genre with a lot of the established tropes and cliches that are used throughout sci-fi, but you know, you see it in the newer perspective, the newer interpretation of a lot of different things, and you see a lot of new guys, the new directors, the new young people on the team. You see their ideas flourishing more, and I think that's the beauty of new anime. Even if you can't get a lot of the new originals that you like, you still get stuff like Wonder Egg every now and then, where you're seeing a lot of very unique ideas that are getting presented to us. And for that reason, I'm very, very much so more optimistic about newer anime, because, you know, the old anime is said and done. And with newer anime, we can at least get, you know, a lot of fresh ideas, and we can get the continuation. We can get the heir apparent to the previous generation, because time is undefeated in a lot of regards. And even if you look at the great studios, like let's look at Ghibli. I promise you, in the 80s and 90s, if somebody said, you know, Ghibli is gonna fail at some point, people wouldn't believe you. You know, and now there's not much with Ghibli. A lot of the team went on to work with Shinkai. You know, they're going in the CG direction, which is completely against what Ghibli believes in. You know, during the past and even to the newer era, you see still cells and that classic Ghibli style and all of that. And time is undefeated, because you see them going in a completely new direction now, and even arguably failing in a lot of regards. So that's why I would say new anime is where I'm focused on, because it's going to be the heir apparent to the past. It's going to be, you know, what's next. Like, how are we as fans going to like contribute to the future of anime? And it's very interesting to me, and that's why I'd say newer anime is where it's at. But old anime is fantastic. Like, let's not undercut it. A lot of my favorites list is from the 90s and stuff. So no diss to old anime and stuff like that. It's just we have to look towards the future, because time is undefeated in almost every regard. And we'll still get fantastic series. Like, if you want slice of life, we had our March Comes Like a Lion. If you wanted to see the future of CGI, look at Studio Orange, what they did with Land of the Lustrous and Beastars. Fantastic stuff. Just stuff that we thought was impossible before. We get to see it now. And even if we get our failures like X-Arm and all of that, it's the growing pains, I would like to say. It's our growing pains to see where we can go further from here.
I want to give a big, huge shout out to Ash the Man, My Name is Doofy, and Snowball YT. You guys made amazing responses, some really good points, and, you know, big thanks to all of you guys for helping me out with this project. It really does mean a lot, and I hope we can all work together again.